So you're joining us mid-conversation, and we're just going to continue. Um, so working on this it's actually interesting because initially it was PHP web application and API. Those are both written in PHP, and then it's a pure Android. It is native Android, so it's just Java. They don't care about iOS at all or anything like that. So it's a little Android app. And I looked at it and was like, and in the database is just MySQL. So I was like, or maybe no, it was MySQL. And I said, well, let's go ahead and upgrade it. It's not really much of an upgrade, basically just kick it up to MariaDB. So getting some of the newer stuff because it was an older version, not anything substantial. Their database really had like no indexes and almost no foreign keys built into it. It was just like tables. So I said, oh, that's part of the reason it runs slow as molasses. Besides, it's got hundreds of thousands of rows in a couple of places. And so built that out. They were using Twilio already, and I've used that in several places on apps. So it was really easy to just like grab that. And they've got tons of Python examples. So even if there was something I needed, off and running with that.
Nice.
And I did convert it. I was like, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and instead of PHP for the web server, I was going to do Django with an Apache front end. And then I started out using Flask to build out the API. And the more I looked at it, I was like, I think I'm going to try the Django REST stuff because then it's just one server and you've got all of the above available. And that has worked out really well. And so I didn't have to, essentially duplicate code or have two code bases. It's just one spot for everything except for the mobile. And that's been a pretty fun little project in itself. So it's one of those that it is a reclamation kind of thing where the last time a developer touched it was probably a year or two ago. They don't have any documentation. They've had multiple developers and they have not had any like good handoff. So that's part of what it is it's sort of fun because it was originally an ugly code source. It's actually a pretty cool application. And they said, essentially it's like, okay, let's do this right. So he like said, let's do CI/CD and let's do all these kinds of things. So I've talked about it. I said, yeah, I'm like trying to just get it converted up so they can get it running. But I said, I've got plenty of technical debt. So I'm going to swing back around at the end and flesh out more of the documentation. I'm going to go use the GitHub, assuming I can use GitHub pipelines and that so that we can do like a push to development or push to test development, whatever it is, push to production, get all of that stuff automated. It's just been, yeah, it's one of those. It's fun to have somebody that really wants you to do it right. And like I said, even though the estimate initially was like, oh yeah, it's like if it all works like you think it is, it's going to be pretty simple. He wasn't sure. And it was one of those, he'd even warned me. He said, you might have to rewrite it from scratch. I was like, okay, if I rewrite it from scratch, that's going to take a while. And I didn't realize exactly how long until I got into it because they've got a lot of logic built back into the code. The good thing is I've got source code for everything. So there's like, as I've been building out the API, I'll go grab big chunks of PHP code and essentially convert them over to Python and have to update them anyways because we have made some corrections in the database. So they're all the crap that they sort of like just tacked on have designed that now knowing the end result can design it properly. So fun times.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Are you doing the documentation using ASCII docs or just plain Markdown?
No, I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet for those. It does have some built-in, and I haven't really played around with the Django RESTX or whatever they call it. I forget what they call it, but it's basically the REST library. The Flask stuff it was really easy to basically just hook in Swagger, and I was using that from the API point of view. And I don't know if I'll be able to do that with the rest or if I think it's got its own. So I'll explore that a little bit deeper and decide what looks better. I think Swagger may be the easier way or the more acceptable way to do it from the API point of view. The the code itself is not that complex once you get into the views and that, but I'll probably do some sort of, the equivalent to JavaDoc for the Python Django side. And then it'll be more, I think it'll probably just be Markdown because it's just that's what I've already got. I'll probably end up doing the markdown for the general technical doc kind of thing of like, hey, here's how you build it and things of that nature.
So you were using Flask to generate the Swagger, or just Swagger with Open API to generate the basically the
You can hook, there is a, within Flask, there is a piece that just, so it's just you as you write it out, you're writing, it's markup code. Essentially, it's as long as you write the code and write the comments in a certain format, then it's going to pick them up and it's going to generate your Swagger side for you. That's what I did for the. I'll just show that real quick.
so the reason I'm asking that, so let me kind of spoil this a little bit. So I'm currently working on my code generator or my test generator,
Mhm.
and I'm trying to get it to read Open API documentation and generate a test framework just off of an API, just off the Swagger. It doesn't even need the source code.
Right, and that's what you should be able to do it because this is I think I'm sure, yeah. So um, this is that little shortener, and I just threw together when I built the API. I threw some extra stuff because I was working on documentation stuff, but it's it basically it's just it's stripping stuff out of the comments, and then it's got within their uh, within the library, you've got a standard REST library, and then they've got like the RESTX library that adds a couple of pieces, including thing like so I can do just your regular, Swagger stuff. So I can do your whole, you go in.
What's the JSON? So if you click the JSON at the top, does it dump it all out like Open API does? Right there.
Yes, I think
Yeah.
it does. Yeah.
Ooh,
So
okay. Oh, I could possibly use that too. Okay, cool.
yeah, I mean, you can once you get it because the standard once you're into the standard Swagger stuff, then I think it doesn't matter what it is on the back end. Um, it's going to be once you're on that Swagger page, then I think you can pull the source from it, and you could easily. That would probably be the way to do it. Is just grab that JSON, walk through that, and that's how you do your code generator.
Yeah, but it depends how the Swagger is generated. So I noticed that if you apply it, if you define your Swagger to Open API, it formats it slightly different. So the JSON's a little bit, it's structured differently. Like you have different tags and IDs and things like that.
Oh,
Um,
that's true. So you may have to do some little format, pre-formatter or something like that to just say, hey, which one am I working with?
yeah, and that's why I thought that was kind of cool what you just showed, because I could potentially use that as a okay, what's it look like just plain JSON, just regular standard Swagger without the generated stuff that Boot does with Open API. Compare the two, see what's different, and then I could mock the generator to read it a certain way. Um, but no, cool. I didn't want to digress too much from that, but that's neat. So Flask, Django, MD. What was the Trello you said was the mail server?
Oh, Twilio,
Oh,
Twilio. That's they bought, they were, or they bought, I think they bought SendGrid a while back. And so Twilio is really not, I mean, they've got a pile of stuff. They do SMS, they do email, they do all of those pieces. And yeah, they don't have a free, I don't think, I think but I think you can, if you open up a developer account, I think they'll give you like, first $50 free or something like that, or $20 or something. But it's not. I mean, it's one of those. As long as you're in a development mode and you're just sending, a few emails here, a few texts there, it's basically it's pennies. And so you don't have to worry about it. But it's a really nice framework for doing all that kind of stuff. Basically, once you get in, and it's just your standard stuff. Is they've got an ID. They've got like a secret or an API key or something like that, and then a password with it. You just send those things off. They've got libraries. I'm trying to remember. They've got libraries for a couple of the major languages. Python's one that I've been in, so they've got those, but they've also got. I think they've got a PHP library. I'm pretty sure they've got a Java and a C Sharp. I'm almost positive I've seen Java in the past. So it's real easy to just grab the library, fire up. It's basically it's like grab the library, connect with the class, just give it the couple of, authentication information, and then it's like, it's just like you would want. So it's like send, what's the phone number, what's the message, stuff like that. And then
Gotcha.
it's branded and stuff like that, depending on how you do it. So it will either come from a random number that's, well, I mean, it's your number. You have a number that's always your number that it's from, or you can customize those and things like that, depending on what level you want to go to. So there's a really good little ad for Twilio. So all you guys, you're welcome. Go check it out. TWILIO, TWILIO. I think it's .com. Tell them we sent you. I guess maybe they'll send us a free T-shirt or something like that.
Yeah, we use local stack for that for testing so that we don't have to actually go generate. We can use like a random ID for the keys, and it works really well to just quickly stand up a server, run your test. It will actually generate the email, put it into the queue. You can pull from the email queue and make sure it's there, make sure it's formatted right. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I thought when I first was looking at it for one of the apps we did a little while ago, I thought about doing something like that. And then when I looked at it, I was like, you know what? It's easier to I'll go ahead and set up the account with Twilio, and then I don't have to change anything. It's just like, it's 100% from soup to nuts. It's the same code and stuff like that. So this episode, I think I want to get into, what did I want to get into? Oh, the video shorts. We talked about that. So I think for the first one I think we'll dive right into that, is sort of what and definitely ask questions when we go into it, but I think it's just going to be sort of like, what was my mindset? How did I put those together? And I think it's because I do think it's useful along the lines of the um, source code of happiness kind of approach to like building your brand, building your own skills and things like that. Is why not, kill two birds with one stone? Is go out there and have some content that shows you working through a problem, because I think that can be very helpful. If nothing else, it shows you a real person. So where a lot of times now it's just, they're like, hey, we want a video or a picture or something, because they don't want you to be, they don't want something like where you're the guy that's the resume that I'm hiding behind. And then they end up talking to me at some point and they're like, wow, you are totally not that other guy, because they find it, people they have no skills. They're just stealing somebody else's identity practically and using that to launch them into their work, into some projects. So we'll do that we'll start into that. So be ready, fire off a couple questions once I get going. Well, hello and welcome back. We are just chugging right along. We have been, actually, you guys missed a whole lot of bonus content because you're listening to this. The podcast is preceded and post-seeded, actually, I guess succeeded by video stuff that we have. We have extra content all the time out on the Developreneur channel on YouTube. If you're watching it, hi. If you're not, you didn't see me just wave to you. And we have that content. It's a lot of times actually after the podcast, it's sort of a continuation. Sometimes before we get into very different stuff. For example, this time, if you want to learn a little bit more about what the heck is Twilio, we just had a little conversation about that. And check us out, like I said, YouTube, developreneur.com, or check out the site and then you can go there. As always, or if you've never been here, to introduce myself, I am Rob Broadhead. I am one of the founders of Developreneur, also known as Building Better Developers. That's its own little story. And also founder of RB Consulting, a software solutions group where we do integrations and migrations and things of that nature. You could check us out at rb-sns.com. Enough for that kind of stuff. I will also allow Michael to continue. Michael, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, my name is Michael Malash. I'm also one of the co-founders of Developreneur with Rob, and I am also the founder of Envision QA, where we help healthcare and small businesses build integrated web systems or software to meet their needs.
And I just realized I haven't even talked about what this episode is going to cover. What we're going to talk about this time is essentially, it comes out of the Source Code for Happiness book, where we were talking about skills and side projects and hustles and how you can define those in a way that will help you along your career roadmap, whatever your path is. And one of the things that has we've gotten into specifically is doing shorts, doing video shorts of you coding, which is what we've done. You go out to the YouTube channel, you'll find bunches and bunches and bunches of those where, for example, I walk through getting a Python certification, learning Python, learning SQL. There's a couple others. Doing using Python to build an API, building a link shortener app. Lots of stuff out there, and I wanted to talk about the mindset of that because it was something that Michael and I were having a discussion, and I realized how much it really is something that I think anybody can do. That you could jump in, just basically if you've got a phone, or better yet, if you've got a camera on your PC, which or laptop, almost everybody does now, is you just flick record or screen record. Just put that onto your a Zoom call, or pick your you can use QuickTime. You can use whatever you want to record stuff, and there's a lot of screen recording things out there. You don't have to have your face in the video at all. Is just record your desktop or your IDE as you're going through it, and then all you have to do is just talk through what you're doing code wise. Now you may say, okay, that's easy for you to do because you talk all the time. Yes, some people may say I do. I would argue for a long time with them and then realize that I just spent a lot of time talking. What you want to do though is I think some of us anyways, we work better just verbalizing some of the thoughts that are going on in our head as we're working our way through problems. But also, this is going to help you sort of explain what you're doing as you're doing, because it's good practice. Because at some point, even if you're doing code that nobody's like behind your shoulders and watching you code, they may at some point say, why did you do that? Or what was your thought process? Or why did you build it in that way? And this is going to help you build some of those skills. Plus, you're going to be able to show off your ability to code in whatever that language or environment is. You're going to have those videos. So now you have this branding that you can start working with, that you can include it in blogs. You can point people to it. You can use it as a sort of like a lead magnet kind of thing. If you could have, just like a lot of people do, you can have a YouTube channel that you just record yourself doing various coding tasks. It's also useful from a reference point of view. If you're going through and setting up, for example, a server, this is one of those things we've done a lot, where we get out on Amazon, grab an EC2 instance, and go install a LAMP stack. We've done it several times. We've got notes on it. I've searched and found them and reused them multiple times. We've built scripts around it. Something like that. If you've got a little video that you did, then you can walk through there and go, okay, that's right. I did this, I did this, I did this. And it's an excellent reference for you. So I highly recommend, in a general sense, try recording yourself writing code and talking through it. Worst case, when you get done, you don't have to publish it or anything like that. Nobody ever has to see it. However, I think it's valuable. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I've talked a little bit. So let's start with some questions for Michael, because I know this, because you sort of prompted this conversation anyways. So throw me some things of where you'd like to see this go.
Sure. So what kind of prompted this whole discussion was I've been working on retooling my test-driven development tool, my code generator, into multiple languages. And I've come to the conclusion that while it's very useful in Java, it's not quite as scalable to quickly generate frameworks in other languages from my initial approach. Because the initial approach was, hey, I wanted to hack something out. It got really useful, but the code's dirty and it's a bit dated and it needs a refreshment. So I was like, hey, I'll go to Python. You're like, oh yeah, hey, I got all these Python classes out here. Just refresh your memory with that. So I started going through those, and I know we've done a lot of classes, a lot of recordings. I've done a whole series on test-driven development and testing, but coding, to me, to record the small segments you did, which was really cool. However, when you're doing something like that, how do you get it refined enough to where you have, okay, here's the approach I want to do where you're not spending an hour or two for a 15-minute video? Do you essentially script it out first, or do you just do it once and then come back, refine it in your mind, and then record it? Like do you actually like code it once, then stop, and then go back to it and record based on how you went through it?
I feel like I'm giving away the magician's secrets here a little bit. Um, Actually, well, not most, some of those were 15-minute videos that took me 2 hours of recording and another hour of editing to clear them out. What I do, this is an approach that I take, is one, I come into it with um, a small section of work I want to do. That's like, I just want to do an example of this kind of code or tackle this little problem and it's usually that I think is a little problem. Sometimes there were these multi-parters because I thought it was going to be quick. And then I realized, oh no, I'm going to have to show some other pieces to get to that. So it's going to have to be a 2 or 3 part, series. But those were usually done in one, sitting essentially. And what I do, a couple tricks of the trade, is I sit down and I start into when I'm going to sit down and do it. My first little bit, and you probably noticed, is usually cleaner because it's basically my first minute or two. I'm saying, this is what I'm doing. This is my goal. One of the things that I did for the shortener app that was actually very helpful to me is I had a little markdown page that the standard project notes that you see that gets generated out of GitHub or something like that. Well, I went in and the first thing I did is I said, I basically did I did actually an episode of generating requirements. And so what I did is it was in a really fast and loose, quick kind of way. But I said, here's the requirements for my application. And the way I did is I set up a bunch of bullet points of I'm going to have to do A and B and C and D, and did them in ways that were broken down so that I was like, I should be able to do these in 15 to 20-minute increments, because there's no magic to that time. It's just, that's what I've found. I like, that works best for me as far as me generating it. Nobody's ever complained. So that's worked well. And it's, for me, it's a bite-sized thing. So if somebody's searching for a specific solution, how do I do X? I've got something that doesn't take them 3 hours to figure out how to do that thing.
Okay, so to tack onto that, so that was the first part of this. Now, the second part is I noticed when you were going through some of these, you had a particular environment, IDEs, setup, whatever. Is it better for our listeners, if they want to do something like this, to do it generically with like Notepad or a text editor, and then use the straight up compilers to try to enforce the environment setup that you want to use for what you're teaching?
I would not use the compilers and text editors because it's this century. It's like nobody. That's honestly, that's a conversation I had with a couple of guys not too long ago that had just come out. I mean, these are computer science degreed guys that they never saw an IDE. They didn't know what an IDE was. They could barely spell it when they graduated college. And then they get into the real world. And the first thing that happened, the one guy, I was his first input. The first thing that happened, I said, here's a couple of IDEs that you need to install. Here's the plugins you want to do. And it took him a week to get going because he had to Google, what the hell is this stuff? And we talked about it. And it's because as soon as you get into the real development world, you're going to use an IDE. Now, granted, if your content is IDE specific, and it's very it's very hard almost not to be, because whatever your language is, there's almost always going to be at least 2 or 3 major IDEs. If you're Java, there's like IntelliJ, there's Eclipse is still out there. There's actually multiple flavors of Eclipse. And then there's Visual Studio Code, and then you get like Visual Studio. Take your pick, but I think it's better off to give examples to do it in a way that, like, this is me working. Now, if you want to do it as as a training material or something that is there's more of a class and a course, then I do like that. I mean, I've always started whatever the languages I did, I'll start with command line. This is how you run it from the command line. But I will usually very quickly, like within the first week of material, switch over to an IDE because you really don't want, you're not going to be sitting in an editor. You don't want to be doing some sort of weird command line debugger. You want to have a full blown IDE. You want to be able to debug it. You want to be able to run it as, as easy as possible. And so I would pick an environment that's comfortable for you, particularly in this case, is just because you're essentially going to just click record, do something that is comfortable for you, and then start going. And that's what I did. Now I did tweak, I think, depending on what I did select the IDE based on my task at times. There was one that I did a while back that was all on Cloud9, Amazon's. It's the the mobile. It's basically Eclipse again. It's the mobile Eclipse IDE, and wanted to make sure, see if I could do that to actually go through and see if that actually worked as a full blown IDE. Spoiler alert, it did. But this goes back to sort of that first question. Get yourself something that's comfortable because you may end up where I did is I'll be coding along and I think this is good. And what we always do is we hit a bug. Something's not working. And so what's fun, and like this is what I do is I would go in and go, oh, here's a bug, and be something like, oh, this isn't working right. And usually I give it about one attempt. And if it looked like I was going to need to take more, then I would just shut up. And so like when I'm watching the video, I'll have like my little, I can see the audio line and then suddenly it flatlines for a while. And then I would always come back and I'd go 1, 2, 3, or actually, surprise, guess it's not a secret. I go 3, 2, 1. And then I could see I could see each of those little hills. And so I could see when I saw 3 hills together, it's like, oh, this is me coming back in, because what I do is I go through, fix it, and then, or, get through that bug and then say, okay, where was I at? And then basically then set myself back up to say, okay, now I'm going to start talking again and move forward like that. Like one case, I had an hour and a half of trying to track something out. That hour and a half did not show up on the video because I just cut the whole thing out. And it was like a 2 hours of video that turned out to be, I think, 20 minutes when I finally cut it all down, because I just threw out all the crap where I was just sitting there, like trying to figure it. And it's like if you get configuration issues or something where you come back after 30 minutes and you go, oh, by the way, I had the case wrong on this letter, or I misspelled this, parameter. Then you can edit that stuff out.
All right, so let me sum this up a little bit for those that are listening, because you just kind of unloaded a whole package of information there. So my initial idea or question was, how do you break down your recordings into smaller segments? For those that are new, you kind of want to go into it, just hit record, start doing it, but do it in an environment or in a IDE that you're comfortable with, so that you can just kind of flow, get used to it, do it a couple of different times. For those that are a little more advanced, or you're getting a little more custom, getting into a more course driven, typically use something that you're comfortable with, but would it not be safe to say use something that is a little more industry standard, like visual code, or at least something that's more exposure for what people are used to seeing or might see in the industry? So you don't want to necessarily have them show them something like maybe Cloud9 that may not be as useful today, but like Visual Code is, or like PyCharm, regardless. But take a look at where you are today and what's available, and make sure you're doing something that's generic enough that can kind of stand the test of time, at least for a couple of years. So you don't have to go back every year and keep rehashing your videos if you're doing a course. The second part of that it was interesting. So as you kind of laid out your courses, and you and I have both taught multiple boot camps, software classes, and things like that. My favorite approach, and I kind of want your take on this because I've seen you do it different ways, is if I know that I'm going to be teaching X, or I'm covering this topic and it has code, I typically like to put together a empty file with nothing but some comments in it to basically fill in the gaps as I go along. That way the user see what's there, I have placeholders, and I don't have to jump around a bit. What are your thoughts on that?
I do that. I have taken that approach at times. I find that it's a little, um, it takes a little bit extra time to actually build out that recording. So what I'll usually do is I will do it like that is I'll have comments and then I'll build out all the code and then I'll have comments around the code and then sort of walk through the file as I go. Sometimes it's actually stuff where I'll have like spoiler alerts in the code because I'll have stuff that I haven't covered yet. And I'll say, oh, by the way, we're going to come back to this section because that's also something you run into is particularly if you're building out a language. Like when I was doing the Python certification stuff, there were cases where I treated it as if you haven't seen Python before for the most part. I mean, it was like wasn't perfect, but it's along those lines. And there are cases where I would build a little applet to cover a topic, and there would be other things in there. And it's the obligatory, hey, we'll come back to that later kind of thing that you'll see in almost anything. It's even, if you go back to like, calculus professors are like, well, we'll leave that up to the student to solve that problem or something like that. It's something where it's like, hey, just for now, trust me because this code works or you can use this code and then we will come back. And usually I'll even mention that, or I'll take a note as well that, oh, I need to cover this topic in this area, in this section of coding or something like that, or have some sort of callback so I can say, hey, we're going to talk about this in the collections topic or whatever it is, so that while you're looking at it, you don't need it right away. It's sort of a trust me, this is solving this and solving this problem. Just go with the code that we're giving you in this area. And then reference to if you want to know what this block of code does, go check out this other topic or something along those lines. And that's also where it's good to like you can throw stuff in the show notes or something like that that just is a link back to episode 1 where we covered this or those kinds of things.
To kind of tack onto that, the other thing that I like doing with something like that is I like kind of doing like a student copy of a project, which is just a very structural, just driven project. Like here's an empty project with the files that we will build with the comments in them. So as I kind of go along through the lecture, they already have that. They don't have to spend the time building that, but then they can kind of follow along and fill in the code, try to make it work as I go through the lecture. The other thing that I like doing with that is I also like providing like a student hand, like with that also. So you have the student handbook, but I also give a student workbook. So on top of that, I give like a little lab section for homework assignments in that basically is a big comment to go with the PDF. And they basically go in and they have to like do the work, fill it in. Then when I'm all done with the lecture, I essentially dump out to GitHub. I'll open up to the group. Here is the student solution to that project. I kind of like to wait till the end instead of dumping it at the beginning because you want to make sure that they work through the assignment. But for those that are trying to do their own projects or their own ideas, what do you think of that? Do you think they should give it away with GitHub or do you think they should keep it proprietary? Me personally, I like GitHub for one of two things. One, and I know I kind of asked you that, but I kind of want to give my 2 cents on that. But one, I like the GitHub idea because it goes with what we've talked about previously about building that roadmap. Where do you want to go? But also you're building your resume with, hey, I have experience in this. Here's examples of what I've done. And now you have an online profile to go with that. But you got to be careful though, because if you do put it out in GitHub, if you do it public, people can make changes to that. And you could get in trouble if someone comes in and screws with your project and you say, hey, check this out. And an employer or someone comes and looks at it and your code's a hot mess. Anyway,
Well,
back
you
to
do
you.
have to, I mean, you can block that. So you can't, there are ways you can block it so people can't fork your code and stuff, or they can only do it if they fork it and things like that. So there are ways so they're not going to screw up your code. Plus you have a GitHub history. So what I've done with a couple, and I do like using the GitHub approach. I like to what I do is I build the last couple of times I've done it, I build as I go. So I start with a public GitHub repository and then 1 or 2 episodes into it, I have committed code into GitHub, and then I give them the link and say, here you go. And then I tag them as I go. So you can go and you can say, here's episode 1, episode 2, or, class 1, class 2, class 3, so that they can go in, they can pull based on that label, they can see what's there. And then it's, if nothing else, you can pull the prior version, and then you can sort of, work along as I do if you want to pull the code in. And so it's again, this isn't aimed at like a quiz or something like that. It's more of a, hey, watch the video. You're going to get an explanation of what's there. You can skip to the end and just grab the code, but then you're not going to know what the code does unless you've watched the video or read the whatever the documentation is and things like that. So I do find it very useful. And then it gives you an excuse to have a public GitHub repository that people can check out your code. They can, and then they get the best of all worlds. They can see you coding. They can see what came up after the fact, what the final results are, and really get a feel for who you are and how you develop.
Perfect. Before you get, I know we're getting close on time, so I got one final thought for you. So if we're building these short courses, or we're building out a kind of roadmap or a structural content for our listeners, as you're building your GitHub or your Markdown language, is it useful to think about using things like ASCII docs or some other type of documentation that as you're writing kind of the readmes or you're scripting out these classes to kind of generate an ebook format as you're building it? So when you're done with your presentation, you essentially have this free ebook you can hand out with it.
It depends on what your goal is. If you're trying to build a course, then yes. I mean, you want to do that. You're going to want to really have there's a lot of those pieces you're going to do. Like you're going to want to include unit tests and things like that and like build it out. Or if you want to show off your total skill set, is cover all of those bases. If you're just, wanting to show your, little like, vignettes of you coding, then I don't know that you want to go that far. It's one of these things that gets into scope. It's like, really, how much do you want to get into this? Do you want to just show solving a problem, or do you want to show off solving a problem? And it's the kind of stuff is like, do you want to add like a presentation and all these things around it, or do you really just want to be like, hey, here's me writing code? And if you do always use those tools, then by all means incorporate those in. But if it's something that you normally don't use at all, then one, you can decide you're going to do it with this project to give yourself exposure and experience doing that. But two, watch out. You don't want to get into something where you like, go all out and you say, here's how I code. And you've got all these really cool things and these really high end things that you produce. And then when it comes down to what do you really do, you're just cranking out code, then there's going to be that disconnect. And it does help, if you want to do the whole thing, if you want to do the really well polished code, then by all means do so, but just make sure that you're going to follow through with that and realize that changes when you go out and do projects and you use those as references. That changes what people are going to expect of you. And you want to make sure that you are not setting false expectations when you put these things together. It's one of those things that's really, and it's, I guess one last thought, because otherwise we'll go really long on this. Don't put yourself in a situation where you're doing these little things and you're over architecting the snot out of solutions and doing a lot that you really don't need to do. Yeah, it's great. It's cool. It's in some cases we'll say the sort of the right thing to do or the right way to do it. But in a lot of cases, it's not. If you're dealing with somebody that's just trying to get a project like an MVP together, then yeah, they're still going to need documentation. They're going to do some testing, but you're not going to go all out with those because you're not going to have the bandwidth to do it. So you don't want to be in a situation where they say, hey, we need to build a simple landing page. And you say, oh yeah, I can do that. It's going to take me 3 months to do it because there's all of these other pieces that I'm going to build into it. It's like, just be careful of getting too enamored of technology and some of the tools that are out there. But if you can use stuff that's part of your process, then by all means do so. And I'm not going to give you the last word because we've gone a bit too long this time. So we're going to wrap this one up, but there will probably be bonus content, hint, hint, after this. For those of you who are listening, feel free to check us out, subscribe wherever you get your tunes of any your podcasts of any sort, whether it's iTunes or any of the, check out like all the value for value places out there, the podcatchers as they call them, all those kinds of places. We're out there. Um, you can shoot us an email at info@developandor.com if you have questions, comments, or if you want us to take a look at some of the videos and code stuff that you've done, or if you have suggestions for what you would like to see from us, we're happy to hear that. As always, we're just going to continue this on. We are not done with the season yet. We're going to continue just sort of, a topic of the week, a topic of the episode, and just sort of pull some of the experience that we have in our day-to-day lives as we're either developing code or from the business side. As always, go out there and have yourself a great day, a great week, and we will talk to you next time. And now for the bonus material, sort of closing thoughts on that.
So yeah, I like the direction you went with my last question, but I was kind of thinking along the lines for those that are building content like we have, or similar things where you are building a course or you're building this online thing that you have. I'm I'm kind of struggling a little bit because I'm watching what you're doing with the Python stuff. Because I never actually had a chance to go back and watch the 15-minute one you did on Django. Um, because when you published that, unfortunately, my mom was dealing with her cancer. So I missed it completely. It was out of my scope. But now that I'm going back through it and refreshing my memory, I'm looking at that and I'm looking at like those pocket books, right? The Pocket SQL, the Pocket JavaScript. I'm thinking, we could turn that into a Pocket ebook that we could provide with it. Or if anyone just comes out to the site, hey, here's a free Pocket book. That's where I was thinking along that question. That's kind of where that question came from. Also, with my test generated tool, I'm thinking about putting together a type of pocket book or an ebook to go with that. That's just a small, maybe 50-page book. Small, maybe 25 pages, 50. That essentially covers the basics. Here is enough to jumpstart you. And I'm not looking like to do something super, but just something small along those lines that I could also turn into maybe my own 15-minute, 10-minute presentation to kind of segment that out. But yet, go get the book if you want the full content. You know what I mean?
Yeah, if in that sense, if you're building a course of some sort, then I think that is useful to do. That was how I built the one ebook, and I ended up making it. I added a few pages, and I'm trying to remember what the reason why. I think it was so that I could get like a better cover. Like I had to get a certain thickness to be the cover that oh, that's what it was, is I wanted a cover thick enough that you could read on the back, on the binding, you could see the title. And so I opened up a couple pages. So it went from being just like the V fold to one that's more like a square, kind of binding. So yeah, like that. And you're muted.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's like a lot of the O'Reilly books are like that.
Yeah, this was the Beyond the 12 Factor app, but the spine has nothing on it, but it's 50 pages. I was thinking something like this for the test stuff, but in the same token, I was thinking I could build out a more elaborate video series, not even necessarily a course, but a video series on it, or take what I already did and condense that down to like 50 pages and say, here is a crash course or a pocket guide. If you have questions in this, flip to this section. Here's what you need. Go do it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense from a branding point of view and from a marketing material point of view. I've thought about stuff on the Python things in particular, the Python Django SQL series of stuff I did. I thought of things like putting together quick references of some sort. I think I sort of have those in the notes. I forget exactly what I did with each of them because these are the things I was thinking about, and I don't remember how much I executed. I've thought about putting together like a little, almost like a daily kind of thing, which is what we did the launch your internet business is it had that email that came out every day. And I could always go back if I wanted to and go do a little, whatever it was, 28, 21 days, I think, or 28, I think it was 28 days where we ended up. So do a little 28 page little ebook of here's what you do. And I could probably take the steps because I think each day I was like, here's the steps you go through. So we could do something like that. It just, that gets into a deeper level of like how do you slice and dice stuff if you want to have branding, if you want to have content, if you really, it's, to me it's different from I've got a personal brand and I've got some videos to show, sort of help my resume out, versus I'm building courses or something that I'm eventually going to try to like use it as either a lead magnet or to actually generate money to have content that I'm actually going to charge for. Like if I'm going to use a class or something like that, then if I'm going to sell courses, then it's a little different. For those still watching, we're trying to think of what we're going to do for the next episode. This is one of those that, oh, and I think I know what I want to do. So you guys can wait. We're going to cut it right here, and then it's going to come into the next episode. So it's like I'll do a little wavy thing so Michael knows where to cut it.